We're just waiting on Senator Rubio before we get started. So
I'm going to ask for a blanket.
good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the American Enterprise Institute. I'm going to hustle through a quick introduction here because I know the senators are on a busy schedule today and have a vote at 2:15. They have to be out of here right at 2 o'clock. I'm Andrew Kelly. I'm a research fellow in education policy studies here, and on behalf of AEI and the New America Foundation, I'd like to thank Senator Ron Wyden and Senator Marco Rubio for joining us for an important discussion about a new effort to help students and families make sound higher education investments. Senator Ron Wyden has represented the state of Oregon in the U.S. Senate since 1996. During his time in Congress, he has worked on various policy issues including health care, tax reform, and education. Senator Marco Rubio was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2010, and he represents the state of Florida. His committee assignments include commerce, science, and transportation, foreign relations, intelligence, and small business and entrepreneurship. Senators Wyden and Rubio recently introduced the Student Right to Know Before You Go Act, a piece of legislation that would match up existing warehouse data to provide a comprehensive picture of the higher education landscape. In particular, it would provide information down to the institution and the program level about student outcomes like labor market returns and debt accumulation for students. This would fundamentally change the way we think about higher education quality and measure it, and it would open up wonderful new opportunities for a vibrant higher education market for prospective students and their families. I want to jump right into the questions because I know we're tight on time here, and I would ask you, we're going to try and segue to some Q&A from the audience after a little moderated discussion. I would ask you, if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand, wait for the microphone, identify yourself by name and affiliation, and most importantly, ask a question about higher education and transparency and accountability. That is a rule we will stick to. So Senator Wyden, why don't I start with you first? Census data suggests that a bachelor's degree holder earns about $1 million more than a high school graduate over their lifetime. But students have more college options than ever before, and not all degree programs are created equal. What do students and families need to know about their college options, and how does the Student Right to Know Before You Go Act improve upon what's already out there?
Andrew, first of all, thank you very much for giving us this kind of forum. As you know, bipartisanship seems to be in short supply on Capitol Hill, and Senator Rubio and I are trying to change that. We're trying to focus particularly on education. And with respect to your question, the $1 million figure is certainly thrown around a lot. It probably is accurate as an average, but that doesn't mean that if a student enrolls in any college, they're going to somehow just be able to count on that $1 million coming their way. At best, the information that students get today is incomplete. You've got essentially a 35,000-foot approach with respect to this kind of information at a time when an education is going to be the second biggest investment that a young person makes. And so what we're seeking to do is make sure that for the first time, this information is usable, truly usable for students and parents as well as taxpayers in making these decisions. For example, right now the Department of Education essentially goes just by full-time college students, first-time, full-time college students. That represents an ever-decreasing share of the student population. So what we're trying to do is take this oceans of data that is out there and really make it relevant to students and to parents. One last point, and then want to hear from my colleague, is I think federal education policy is at a fork in the road right now. Historically, it has been about access, and access to education and getting young people in the door for an education. I want to keep that focus. I want to support with every bit of my strength Pell Grants and Stafford loans and all of the assistance that ensures access. I think we ought to go, however, to access plus value and make it possible for students and parents to make these decisions so that they can wring the most value out of these scarce resources they have for education. That's the opportunity we'll have when the higher ed bill comes up.
Great. Senator Rubio, why did you choose to co-sponsor this piece of legislation, and what's the federal government's role in promoting higher education transparency?
Well, first of all, thanks for doing it, and all of you for being here, and I apologize, I'm a few minutes late. I was actually speaking at another event directly related to this called Opportunity Nation, and what they're focused as well on is upward mobility and economic empowerment, of which education is central to it. Here's why I got involved with this issue. First, from a personal perspective, when I finished my 7 years of post-high school education, including law school, I graduated with over $125,000 in student loans. And that was nobody's fault. I never viewed it as money that I borrowed to, buy a boat or go and have a good time. I mean, it was an investment for me. I invested this money, and I would have to pay it back over my lifetime in exchange for a certain set of skills that I thought would help me make a living. And so I don't regret doing that at all. Obviously, I was always interested. Every month, some lady called Sally Mae was taking money out of my bank account. But anyway, I don't know if you guys know her at all. But anyway, so I think about how people are making decisions now in that regard, and it's a very simple equation. We want kids to have access to information before they choose to make this investment. Most people aren't going to have 100,000, but 20,000 or 15,000 or 30,000 is significant. So the first thing we want people to know is what are the new skills, what are the new jobs, what are the new careers that this 21st century is creating? What are the opportunities? Sometimes there's not enough. Some of the new jobs and opportunities that are, because the change is happening so fast now, that there are all these new professional opportunities being created that haven't made their way into the popular culture yet. You don't even know these jobs exist yet. So how can you study for it or aim for it if you don't even know it's there? The second thing we want kids to have access to is these are the jobs that are out there, this is how much people make in these careers. Not because you want to do it for money. People a lot of times will go into a career that doesn't make a lot of money, but they love doing it. And the reason why you need to know what your professional prospects are is because you have to weigh that against how much you're going to borrow to pay for it. So a perfect example is I always wanted to be a prosecutor. I wanted to, at least for a few years, wanted to be able to be in the courtroom and argue in front of a jury. I just didn't realize that you couldn't do that with $125,000 in student loans. That's nobody's fault, but and maybe I should have known that. I should have done the math. I knew it paid $30,000 a year, and the monthly payments were going to look X. But I just never did that. Would it have changed the decisions that I've made? Maybe. I don't know. But the point is, I didn't have access to that information in a coordinated way. It's out there. The pieces of information are out there, but no one is coordinating it. So this is not a mandate. This is not designed to discourage kids from going to one school over another or going into one career over another. It's simply information that allows us to make wise decisions. And look, if I get a box of cookies, it tells me how many calories it has, how much sodium it has. I get to make a decision about whether I want to put that stuff in my body or not. And it's the same with this, only in a much bigger way. You're making a decision about what you want to do with the rest of your life. And I think one of the things we need to start grappling with is that kids are now making decisions at 17 years of age that have dramatic impacts on them when they're 55, and in terms of how much money they owe and where they work. And so this is designed to create enough or more information in a coordinated way to allow families to make wise decisions.
So Senator Wyden, I guess at a basic level, what kind of information are we talking about here, first of all? And second, a skeptic might ask, why can't we rely on the states to collect and publicize these data on their own?
Well, the states can do this on their own, but there's a problem in terms of going about that. First, you don't have uniform standards. And if you don't have uniform standards and the systems don't talk to each other and you have incomplete information and a lot of our students are mobile, you've really got a system that is failing a lot of families. So we wanted, as Senator Rubio said, to put it all in one place. And what we do is we make the states partners by connecting the data that colleges already collect to wage record data at a particular institution. And we came up with a hypothetical student, so you'd get a particular example. Let's say you had a part-time student at Institution A studying bioengineering. What you'd like to know is, what are their prospects of graduating on a date certain? We give them that. What's the average debt they're going to have? And what are they likely to earn a few years out of school? Today, that information is just strewn all over the countryside. So we make it possible to put that in one place by updating the way in which schools report the data to the Department of Education. And we think, and we've got a lot of education experts in this room who know a lot more about iPads and this PEDs and that kind of PEDs than myself, we think we're actually going to save schools time and money in terms of reporting.
Great. So, Senator Rubio, for citizens who are not prospective students or their families, why should they care about this piece of legislation?
Well, for two things. I want to answer that, why we should care. But let me just answer the question you asked me, and I didn't get to it, but it's related to the question you asked Senator Wyden, and it's why should the federal government be involved in this endeavor? Two things. The first is that we have a federal investment in this, both in the Pell Grant programs, but also in the subsidized student loans. This is federal money. We want to make sure that this federal money is being used in the highest and best way to achieve the return on investment, so to speak. The other thing is that learning has changed, whether it's distance learning or kids willing to go halfway across the country to study in a specialized situation. They're no longer limited geographically to their community or to their states. And the other thing I'm amazed with, by the way, is that a lot of kids are going to find out that some of the best bargains are in their own backyard. It's in their community college, maybe even in a private, non-traditional institution. Right down the street is producing workforce opportunities for you. You didn't even realize it's right down the street. And to have access to that information maybe takes some of the pressure away from marketing for some of those institutions so they can put more money back in the classroom instead of having to market so much. Again, this is kind of open brainstorming, but I think it's real, given what I've learned about studying. So what was your original question now? I went off on the tangent.
Why should the average taxpayer?
Yeah. And I think I answered that as part of that as well. First of all, your tax money is going towards education right now. As we speak, you are subsidizing education opportunities for kids all across the country. Here's the second reason. That there are two things we need in order to create the kind of economy we all want. One is we need an economy that's growing vibrant and fast, that it's creating entrepreneurial opportunities as well as job creation opportunities. And so much of what we're debating in Washington is about that. What should tax policy be, regulatory policy be, energy policy, immigration policy? What can we do to create the conditions for economic growth? But the second part of growth is you also have to have people that are capable of doing the jobs that the growth is producing. And they go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. You can't create vibrant industries if you don't have a workforce prepared to fill or to be retrained to fill the jobs that are being created by that growth. These two things go hand in hand. And so I think that we have a national interest in ensuring that we are producing a workforce capable of fueling the kind of economic growth, which, by the way, growth is the only solution, in my opinion. It is the only solution to the problems that we face from a debt perspective and et cetera. Growth is the only solution that we have. We don't grow this economy, we will never get our hands around this debt problem.
And I'd only amplify it. I mean, if you don't have a trained, skilled workforce in a position to get the jobs of the future, that high unemployment is going to reverberate through all of the big decisions we make, Social Security and Medicare. That's going to be the focus of the debate in the fiscal cliff in early next year. And the fact of the matter is, when you care about seniors and you care about retirement policy, you better have a healthy workforce paying into those programs.
Great. In the interest of time, we have about 4 minutes before you have to be shot out of the proverbial cannon back to the hill. Let's take a few questions from the audience. Please look for the microphone circulating around. If you have a question, please raise your hand and identify yourself by name and affiliation. Let's go back here, Taryn. First.
Thank you. I'm Peggy Ochowski. I'm the congressional correspondent for the Hispanic Outlook on higher education. Two issues. One's graduation rates, and apparently many colleges say they can't collect that kind of information because they have students coming and going. They don't really know who started and who graduated. So what about that? And then I wanted to ask about the foreign student visa legislation that would give automatic green cards to STEM graduate students.
Well, just on the second piece about that, I think I can't imagine we would educate kids in West Point and then send them to China to run their military with our experts. I think the same is true with our industries. I mean, we're graduating brilliant people from all over the world, and I think it's in our nation's interest to keep those folks here to help build our economy. And the information, the job creation aspect of that is staggering. If you look at the jobs that are created every time we keep someone in some of these high-tech fields here in the U.S. is extraordinary. I also hope, by the way, that as a society we'll begin to value STEM a little bit more. There's nothing wrong with law school or medical school. Well, I guess medical school is a STEM discipline. There's nothing wrong with law school and some of these other things that people study, but just societally, as a society, I wish we'd place a little bit more emphasis on how important those careers are in the 21st century. On the first issue, I'd have to get back to you. I don't know all the impediments to that as far as collecting that data, but obviously students and the profile of students has changed in the 21st century. They're a lot more transient, and they don't follow this neat 4-year, 7-year pattern. Sometimes they're in and out with the system over an extended period.
Let's get back to you on that, but a big part of the answer to your question is we essentially replace some of the existing systems, this integrated, I can barely get through the mouthful, integrated post-secondary education data system with an alternative that is state-based and individually configured so that you get much more useful information. And I know that when I met with Oregon universities, Oregon State University, they said, for example, we're very interested in showcasing our skills. We're collecting this kind of information. Universities are generally. We just haven't put it all into one place. If I could, Andrew, can I make one other point that I wish we touched on? Senator Rubio and I often get asked about how this is going to affect liberal arts education. Are we, in effect, are Senator Rubio and Senator Wyden going to have everybody spend all their time getting a computer science degree, a health degree, and an accounting degree, and are we going to miss out on the opportunity for a rich liberal arts education? First of all, this is a question of empowering parents and students to make their own choices. We're not dictating what kind of degree you have. But I also reject this idea that it's either or, that it is either an education where you get a rich liberal arts degree or you go out and learn computer sciences. And many of you know that a lot of universities are already moving to an interdisciplinary approach where they're taking degrees which combine these very kinds of skills. Last point is, as you know, a lot of universities are already making efforts to start to pick up on labor trends. After 9/11, for example, there's a great interest in learning Arabic languages, and I know the two of us are going to sort of be shot out of a cannon in order to make this vote, but I know this subject of is it liberal arts or is it an education just to be able to get a high-paying job. I want you to know we think that's a false dichotomy. We want to empower people to make choices.
I think that's a terrific point to conclude this section of our
Let's give the last
event.
word to Senator Rubio.
Yeah. Well, no, just the other point I make, I think you would agree with this. There's this term used as traditional student. I think one of the things we have to also emphasize is, and I've talked about this earlier today, my dad was a bartender. My mom she worked as a maid and a stock clerk. And I want people in the 21st century to have the opportunity to, while they're doing that job, learn another skill that will allow them to make a little bit more money. And I think this will be helpful as well in that regard, because it will allow you to analyze opportunities that you have to do that. Is there a program out there that will get me into an employment that pays a little bit more and isn't going to cost me a lot more money to get there? So I think this is also will help us to help folks in that non-traditional, which I think is becoming increasingly traditional, by the way, of getting people reintegrated, retrained with a new set of skills that will allow them to be more empowered than they even are today.
Thank you so much, Senator White and Senator Rubio, for joining us.
Thanks. Sorry we have to do this for us.
Okay. We'll have you back. Thanks a lot. Good stuff. We're going to switch out to our expert panel now. Please remain in your seats while we do so. Thanks.
Depending on which way, exactly.
All right. Well, that was a terrific and discussion. Would that all panel discussions were 20 minutes long and featured two senators. We would get in and out, but we did want to have some reaction from an expert panel, which we're very pleased to have here. So my name is Kevin Carey. I'm the policy director, the education policy director at the New America Foundation, which is co-sponsoring this event today. We have a terrific panel to reflect on the ideas that Andrew and Senators Rubio and Wyden just finished talking about. So we're going to jump right into questions. I'm going to start immediately to my left with Amy Jones, who specializes in higher education and student loan policy in her work for Chairman John Klein of the House Committee on Education and the Workforce. So, Amy, it all sounded very compelling to me. Higher education is important, it's expensive, the federal government's spending a lot of money on it, students need better information to make increasingly consequential and complicated choices. We know the states have gathered a lot of information at the program and the student level that is not currently being gathered by iPads at the federal level. Is there any reason why we shouldn't be able to move ahead with this kind of policy? Can you walk us through the politics of these kinds of ideas and how they tend to play out when the rubber meets the road on Capitol Hill?
Sure. So I think you're right. I think there is a lot of conversation right now about higher ed, and it is important, and particularly with the economy and everything, you're seeing more and more people go back for training and those types of things. At the same time, I think you have to think through with regard to this, to a lot of the data that's out there, is what all is out there and what can be consolidated and streamlined so that people are getting the right amount of information. And I think that's where you're going to see some of the political conversations and some of the conversations that we're actually going to be starting tomorrow at a hearing that the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Training is having, ironically enough, where Mark is actually going to be one of the witnesses testifying. But, more information, or information is good. It's trying to figure out what the right information is and what the right information is for the federal government to be collecting, and I think that's where you'll see kind of some of the divergence of opinion.
And do you see a distinction between information that the federal government collects and information that might be collected by the states but then made transparent via some kind of coordinated process, which I think is what the legislation that the two senators are discussing focuses on?
Right. I think there is a distinction there, and I think some of it will also come down on, or one part of the conversation will also be the burden on institutions as well, because we certainly don't want to layer one more layer of things onto institutions that they have to then go through and spend time collecting, and they're spending all of their time doing that for us or for the states or for whomever, and they're not actually able to spend the time doing what they should be doing, which is educating students.
Mark Schneider, currently at the American Institutes for Research, former commissioner of the National Center for Education Statistics, which among its many duties is in charge of iPads. During your tenure at NCES, you pursued a pretty pro-transparency, pro-information agenda. It wasn't always easy. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you learned?
Well, yeah, the politics of higher education, not surprisingly, can be very intense, and institutions of higher education have a lot of power, and they tend to be very defensive, in part because some of the outcomes that they of students and is not really up to the levels that it should be. And when you start trying to figure out the key indicators and putting them out in the public, a lot of institutions get really bent out of shape. I think that the frontier that we're talking about now is the one actually that's critically important. So yes, we have to fix iPads. We could go into we could spend months. I have spent months talking about, why iPads is. My favorite line, I coined it, is iPads is FUBAR. If you remember, Saving Sergeant Ryan. So iPads is FUBAR is like I have it like tattooed on my wall. It's sort of like a geeky thing. But anyway, but I think that what the senators are proposing is actually the next horizon, and that is 90% of students in the United States say that the reason that they go to college is for a good job, and this has been since 2006 and even before the current crisis. And higher education is the ultimate investment. right? It's a human capital investment, and students have the right to know what the outcome of that is likely to be. I think the interesting dynamic, which is, can the states do this by themselves? How can we get a national system to work on this? I'm working with 6 states. On Tuesday, a couple of days ago, we released a report on Tennessee, which is the program level data on the wages of students graduating from every program in public institutions, 2- and 4-year public institutions in the state of Tennessee. That to me is, and it's powerful, but it's limited for some of the reasons that we talked about earlier.
Pauline Abernathy oversees national policy and advocacy strategy for the Institute for College Access and Success. Pauline, your organization is very much focused on the perspective of students. You've done a lot of work on financial aid, the cost of college. Where does this conversation fit in from your perspective?
Thanks for having us here. I mean, it's impossible to argue that students and their families don't need better information. And it needs to be easy to understand and easy to compare, and we don't have that. I was struck, I'm going to hold this up, hopefully people can see it and recognize it. It is the car window sheet that is in the window of every new car in the United States. We have had this since 1958, over 50 years, and it provides very basic information about the car that in a way that's easy to understand and compare. And when it was enacted in 1958, sponsored by a senator from Oklahoma, not exactly a hotbed of consumer activism, it was endorsed by both the dealers and the auto manufacturers. And we need to have some similar things. Now, I'm not saying that a college education is the same as a car. They differ in many ways. One of ways, I hope, is that the moment you walk off the college campus, the value of your degree doesn't drop by a third. But it is an investment, and as the senator said, it is actually the second greatest investment many people will make ahead of their investment in a car. And it is an investment, and we as taxpayers are investing heavily, and we, as the senator said, all have a stake in students completing and getting good value. There's clearly an issue of what information needs to go on here, and there'll be lots of debates about what is the right information, and it may not be the same for all programs. I graduated with a BA in liberal arts, and my salary in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth year out of college was not predictive of my salary 20 years later. And I'd say that's probably the case for most people. So we need to be thinking thoughtfully about what is the right information, and it may not be the same for all programs. But one final comment about this sticker sheet is, a lot of these sticker sheets don't have good things to say about the car. They have, they have miles per gallon of 10 miles per gallon, and they might not do well on the safety measures either, and they say how much you're going to have to spend on gas, and people still buy them. So we shouldn't think that people can't make a good informed decision, or at least a decision for themselves about what to do. I'm going to sneak one more comment in. The final other point is we don't just in cars rely on this. We also have minimum safety standards. You can't, have a car on the road that doesn't meet certain safety standards. So disclosure alone is not enough. You first need to say everything here is safe. It's not going to explode when it gets hit from behind. When you step on the brakes, it's actually going to stop. Those are minimums. We don't leave that up to the consumer. We need to do the same thing with colleges that as well. And it's particularly true because we as taxpayers are providing billions of dollars a year to underwrite the education of some schools. So we have a stake in setting some minimum standards, and then once they meet those minimum standards, letting the consumer decide with good information that's easy to understand and compare.
And if there were such a sticker for cars, what you said there would be a debate about what do you think should be on it?
Well, the administration has put forward a college scorecard, which would have on it very basic information that I think is important for consumers across the board universally. There are others for different programs that you want to vary, but for the basic issue of what are my chances of graduating from this school, how much does it cost, and am I likely to have to borrow if I go there, and if so, what are my chances of being able to repay? Those are some really basic, and how much debt will I have? Those are some basic key information that I think people want, regardless of the type of school or program. And then, if you're looking at a career education program, then you want to know of a series of other things potentially. But that's a good starting place.
Okay. Anthony Carnevale is a labor economist and expert in education, training, and employment. Has worked on Capitol Hill for several administrations, and has produced a great deal of research on the intersection between higher education and the labor market and earnings for Georgetown University. Tony, let me ask you, if you could, we heard earlier this sort of broad statement about people who graduate from college making more money and $1 million on average, and that's a figure that can be calculated a couple of different ways. But it's the point was made, I think, by Senator Wyden that there's a lot of variation inside those averages, and that's a lot of what your work has focused on. Can you share with us, summarize some of your recent findings about what a college degree gets you in the labor market these days?
By and large,
I think your microphone.
By and large, a four-year college degree or graduate degree is worth the money. That $1 million over and above a high school degree holds up. In fact, it's about $1.3 million at the moment, even with the recession. And the wages have held up through the recession. They dropped by about 3% for BAs since December of 2007. But when you add in the value of benefits, the wages hold up. The point being that the old algorithm, which is that the more education you get, the more valuable it is, really doesn't hold up anymore. The variety of education offered after high school in the United States now is such that there are very different returns, so that if you get a certificate in engineering or HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, you'll make more than 25% of college graduates. People need to know that. We're talking about real money here. People with 2-year degrees, about 30% of them make more than people with 4-year degrees. People with 4-year degrees, more than 40% of them make more than the average person with graduate and professional degrees. It is a system since about 1983, which is when this began with a vengeance, that has become very articulated with occupation and career in the economy, and is the principal mechanism that allows people to move into the middle class now. It used to be the preferred route to the middle class. Now it's the most traveled route to the middle class. And it is a mass system. It's not something that only happens to 10 or 15% of Americans anymore, and it is not productive. That is, there are two industries in America that have negative productivity rates. One of them is healthcare, and the productivity rate there is minus 0.9. The other is education, and the productivity rate there is minus 5.2. It's almost 6 times less productive than healthcare. So we have an issue here. We're trying to build a mass system and access to it. And one last point let me make that the senators didn't make, but I think it's important, and that is we know in research that the best way to predict if somebody's going to get an education, a degree or certificate, is that if they know which degree or certificate they're getting and what they want to do with it. Intentionality drives completion. It's a simple logic. If you know where you're trying to go, you're more likely to get there. And so having more information on what degrees do for you in an economy where they're pretty near required now, I think is an unavoidable development in higher education.
So it sounds like what you're saying, that whereas, and I'm sure this was never entirely true, but while it might have been enough to make the decision to go to college somewhere and get some degree, which degree you get and where you go is becoming an increasingly consequential choice?
That's right. That is, everybody needs a plan. And we still live in a society, I think, on the whole, where most people, young people, who go on to college still think that the goal is to graduate. That is no longer textured enough in terms of trying to plan your future, especially given the prices of college education that we're facing now and in the future, and the fact that after January in the United States, after sequestration, the first of many sequestrations to come, we're going to be living in the politics of scarcity, and we're going to choose between Medicare and college. And anything that makes college more efficient, because I don't think Medicare will become much more efficient, accrues to the benefit of American students.
And I mean, as an economist, there's sort of a broad assumption that more information will lead to better choice, which will lead to better outcomes in a more efficient market. And it seems like we do want to be careful not to assume, and I think Pauline touched on this a little bit before, that improved or better informed choice by itself will be the cure to the various problems that we have. I mean, choice is a complicated thing. Do you think that the kind of more, or to what extent do you think the kind of improved information that might be produced by something like the Rubio-Wyden bill would have a significant effect on the numbers that you look at?
If we don't get transparency, we're going to have to regulate. That's the bottom line here going forward. If transparency doesn't work, if better information doesn't improve transactions between individuals and institutions and choices, more informed choices, at some point we're going to have to decide what we're going to pay for. One hopes that information works that way. Generally, the literature in economics, this is pretty well proven. People get big prizes for proving this over and over again, that information does improve transactions. There's something called transactions cost. Information drives down transactions cost. Now, on the other hand, we had the SEC and we still had the gangsters on Wall Street. So, I mean, sometimes information is not enough. Regulation is required. I think that's not the case in higher education.
Gangsters on Wall Street will be the next AEI presentation that will be, or maybe not. We might have to host that one over at the New America Foundation. So, Amy, I want to come back to the lawmaking environment. One of the reasons that we're having a conversation about coordinating the information produced by state-level data systems that gather information about individual students is that in 2008, when Congress passed the last version of the Higher Education Act, they've actually made it illegal for the federal government to gather information in a way that states are gathering information now. And a number of the people here in the room were here for that debate, and as was I. And one of the issues that came up was the issue of student privacy and whether or not student privacy was threatened by this kind of effort, and do you think that this is the kind of work that can be? Are there solutions to the student privacy issue? How much of that do you think is a real problem?
I still think the student privacy question is going to be a huge factor in all of this moving forward. Our members are still going to be exceptionally concerned about going down that path. It's not enough just to say, oh, information technology has improved, that security is fine, and so therefore we don't need to worry about student privacy. The issue is that the federal government just doesn't need to know that much information about an individual person. And once you start to go down that path, there is a lot of concern that the information will be misused, or that more information, once people start to get the information, they'll start to want more information and more information, and then at some point we're going to be looking at the entire lifespan of a person and, deciding if, they did something when they were a child, that means they're going to go into STEM fields later, and we need more STEM people, and so therefore the federal government needs to mandate that people raise their children a certain way, and those are the big concerns with going down that path. So I do think that is still going to be an issue. I think, though, that the transparency and that the data question is one that can be answered and is one that we can work out. And I think that is going to be one of the biggest conversations as we move forward in the Higher Education Act. We're just going to have to be kind of thoughtful about the types of information that we as the federal government feel the need to collect, and whether it's the information that Dr. Connolly or Dr. Snyder or Pauline have mentioned, we're going to have to hash all of that out and decide what are those key pieces of information. And I think there is still a difference that between what we think are the key pieces of information for what students and families should be looking at and researching and what students and families actually research. I know when I was, growing up, and any of you that know me know what a huge Notre Dame fan I am, and a lot of that came from my family all attending there, and that was kind of, what I was thinking about when I thought of a college education. I wasn't thinking necessarily, what did I want to do later, and those things did come into play a little bit because I did end up going to school out here, not in South Bend, but and I knew I wanted to work in government and on the Hill and all of that, but so much of picking a college is also that feeling of, do I fit here, do I belong, do they have something I'm interested in, and it may not be that they know what their major is or they know kind of what they want to do. Now that is, I think, increasingly changing as we see a shift from your as we call them traditional college students, your 18 to 22-year-olds, to more adults or more kind of people going back to school that are outside of that age, and where people are going to be looking for specific programs, where I think some of that information will come into play, but I think that is going to be one of the questions that we're going to need to debate.
And do you see a distinction between, you had said that the federal government only needs to know so much about you. I mean, Senator Rubio's home state of Florida has gathered pretty much all the information that's available about people in a central database for more than a decade. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's been any instances of abuse or of leaked data or anything like that. Does the growing history of states gathering student-level data provide confidence to more federal efforts? Is there a difference between states and federal governments making huge databases?
I mean, I would argue that there is. I mean, one, we're not in charge of the states. The states are their own bodies, and they're able to do what they want with the citizens within their state and with the institutions that operate within their states. Whereas the federal government would have to mandate it across the board for everybody. So I do think that there is a difference, and I think even if you're just looking at it through the security perspective, and we can just look at some of the breaches that have occurred within the direct loan program within the last 5 years that show that even security is still somewhat of a concern. I mean, I think it was just probably 2 or 3 years ago now, where students logged on to their direct loan websites, and other students' financial information was popping up. So, I mean, there is still those concerns, and I don't think that by having the states do them, that's going to make folks any more comfortable that will translate into the federal government collecting this treasure trove of data on people.
Mark Schneider, you were the king of education data. How much of an issue is security? I mean, what is the specific risk to students, and how likely is it that this data could make someone's life a problem?
I think that data security, the issues of data security are real, and we have to be very careful about them. But I think that in many cases, as we all know, that's been used as a smokescreen. FERPA has been regulated, re-regulated, clarified, et cetera, and we still know that it can be used as a smokescreen to stop states from divulging information that I think should be in the public domain. I think that the federal versus state issue is something that's fundamental, and I think it's a federal system, right? Education is the domain of the states by Constitution. But I think that struggling with the issue of the need for transparency and the need for better information is not a slam dunk solution. I think we're going to have to be very careful about moving forward. Some of my friends called the 2008 ban on student unit records the Schneider Amendment, because we were pushing so hard for this and got our heads handed to us over and over and over again on this. Right now, as I noted earlier, I'm working with states, and so states own the wage data. They own and run the unemployment insurance wage data. They own the student unit record system. And half of the states have merged those data, but only a couple of fingerfuls of states have actually put that data into the public domain. So here's what I think actually is one of the flashpoints in this discussion, is that the federal government has given hundreds of millions of dollars to the states to build these data warehouses that link these data. But there is no use requirement in that legislation. And there's a long history on that, too. I mean, I could show you the scars from that fight. But there's no use requirement for making those data available. So I'm going around from state to state to state and saying and trying to convince states that this is data that, for example, the federal government has already paid for, that you're already using, that you already have. And you have to put this into, not you have to, it's a state decision, that you really should put this into the public domain. Quite frankly, it's a slow and inefficient process, but it's one that we could do right now. And I think that one of the roles in this federal system is if the federal government keeps giving out, well, actually, most of the money is gone already. You know, the hundreds of millions of dollars in state longitudinal data systems, they should have had a use requirement in there. And I'm not sure, since most of that money's out the door and there's not a lot more coming down the road, it's a little hard to say now, oh, by the way, you know, you have to make this money, you have to make this data public or we're going to take your money away. It's all gone. So I think that was a really fundamental mistake. And I think we have to be really careful moving forward when the federal government starts investing in data warehouses and data systems to make sure that, in fact, the states have some obligation and requirement to make these data public and transparent.
And I want to make a clarifying question for the audience. The Wyden-Rubio proposal would not run afoul of the prohibition on a federal...
No, I think they've been very careful about that.
So this is actually a way... So to the extent that concerns about a giant federal database exists, this wouldn't create one. It would simply coordinate the information that's already being collected legally at the state level?
Well, legally, I mean, yes, the states can do this, and the states have done, many states have done this. But not all the states. Only about half of the states have done it. And as I said, at the current time, and which is why I think that the legislation is so important, is because very few states have made these data public, and they should all be made public.
Now, we also have, the student loan industry has created their own national unit record higher education data system that exists now here in the Washington, D.C. area, the National Student Loan Clearinghouse.
Right.
It's out in an office building off of 295,
right.
I think. So, and that, you know, and that's actually not under any kind of government auspices at all.
Correct.
Is that also potentially a resource that could be used toward the purposes of transparency?
Well, they're trying increasingly to make it so, but remember what I mean, that's a business, and their business model is driven by the decisions of their members, the colleges and universities who are members of that and pay for that. So one of the problems that I've always had, and this is a long-standing conflict between NCS, for example, education, and the National Student Clearinghouse, is I guess the way to put it is who owns the data, right? And how aggressively it is put out into the public domain. So iPads, again, is a problematic data source, but you can go and, I mean, every piece of data in iPads is available to anybody that wants to find it. If you're running a private business, even though the clearinghouse is a not-for-profit organization, it's still run by its members. It's a totally different thought process about the transparency and the push of the data into the public domain.
Okay. Tony Carnevale, one of the things that Senator Wyden brought up was this question about the liberal arts. So Senator Rubio was saying we need to be more focused on STEM. Senator Wyden talked about the liberal arts. Pauline sort of noted that she had to go through a period of some lower earnings with her liberal arts degree before scoring the big money that comes with nonprofit student advocacy 20 years later. So right. So, but your work is all focused on employment outcomes. Is there a danger that we almost by accident define or further define the purpose of higher education in a way that aligns with available economic data?
I think in the end, the crucial issue here is, one, that liberal arts, a four-year liberal arts degree still pays off. It's about 42 grand a year over a 45-year career on average, which is pretty good. Nothing like a degree in petroleum engineering, which is 85 grand a year over a 45-year degree. That's reality. I think people should know that. Also, the notion that we should integrate liberal arts as hybrid programs into more practical and applied courseware, I think, is something that is going on out there because people want both. The more wealthy a nation becomes, the more education it wants to buy. That share of our GDP keeps going up. We now expend $1.4 trillion a year on human capital development in the United States. So, and about 400 of that is higher education. So I think, but my own bias about this, and it's fairly strong, it's what makes me different, I think, from a lot of people who have other biases I carry, and that is that in the United States, the only requirement for being a citizen here is that you work. In the end, if you don't work, the rest of us aren't going to support you. We settled that with welfare reform. And in the American system, the fact that you're going to be work and make a living wage means you've got to participate somehow in the post-secondary education and training system. It's not altogether true. There's still about 30% of high school graduates, virtually all male, who can make between 35 and 55 grand a year without going on to college. Most of them get fairly strong formal employer training in manufacturing, construction, transportation, and utilities. So that avenue is breaking down, getting more and more narrow. I think in the end, one of the economic purposes aren't the only purposes that higher education serves, not by a long shot. I think it's hard to find somebody who believes that that's the case. In the end, it serves basic human development interests, creating better citizenry, giving people the capacity to live fully in their time is the most broad vision of it, I think. But in the end, in the American system, if you can't get a job, you're not going to live fully in your time. And the risk that you won't get much human development if you're unemployed or participate in our civic culture or be a good citizen or a good family member is very, very high. So I think while employment is not the only role for higher education, I think it's the pivotal one. If higher education doesn't make people employable, it's not going to make them good citizens and good family members or community members either.
Pauline, you talked about you made the point that we have the sticker, but we've also got regulation. We don't rely on the car sticker to regulate the market or entirely. And to some extent, we're kind of moving in that dual direction in higher education as well. And so even as we're having discussions like this and we're talking about a shopping sheet and more transparency, there's also been a renewed regulatory effort, quite a controversial one, and one focused primarily at for-profit colleges that rather than simply rely on accreditation and consumer information says if your outcomes are this bad, we're going to shut off the spigot of money and essentially sort of shut you down. Should we head in that direction for the larger populace of colleges and universities beyond just profit-seeking ones? Does it make sense for us to, as we gather more information, because I think, implicit in the controversy around these proposals, one of the reasons I think that this legislation might not just be passed by Congress in the next 4 weeks, is a fear among all manner of universities that information is sort of the prerequisite for regulation. Should we move towards more regulation? Is that part and parcel of a strategy that's sort of pro-student from your perspective?
Well, I think I don't see any interest in moving towards a system where we're reducing choice for students beyond reducing choices that are unsafe, the equivalent of a car without brakes. Where we have debates are what is unsafe,
right.
And where to draw that line, and that's a healthy debate to have. And in terms of gainful employment, I would just point out that again was a rule that applied to public, nonprofit, and for-profit. In fact, applied to more programs at public colleges than at for-profit. So Others, yeah. So I would say that was an approach to say for this category where Congress has said there's a different standard for its eligibility for federal student aid, that it has to prepare you for gainful employment, it's appropriate to have a different set of standards. But there are ways we can come up with thoughtful standards, minimum standards that are uniform. On the other hand, in some cases we might want to target to where the risks to students and taxpayers are the greatest. So I think both approaches make sense. As an example of the first, the state of California recently established performance measures for its Cal Grant program, which is a $1.5 billion state grant program. And what they said is whether you're public, nonprofit, or for-profit, if your students are going to get the Cal Grants, which are very generous, you can't have a 3-year cohort default rate over 15.5% in any 1 year. So they've picked a much tougher standard than the federal government. And in fact, they've added a graduation rate standard to that in addition to that tougher cohort default rate standard. But what they said is we're going to apply this to schools where 40% or more of the students borrow. So if most of the students aren't borrowing, that's a different matter. But where most are, we're going to then apply this very tough standard. And that's a way you can, again, have something that is universal, but really targeting the issue where the risk is greatest to students and, quite frankly, also to taxpayers. And I think is the kind of thing we can be thinking about that then allows students to make a choice. They can go to the schools, but without a Cal Grant, or they can go to one of the schools that does meet that standard. And again, what we'd like to see is to have clear information so that the students can make an informed decision about schools, whether the school is eligible for a Cal Grant or is not, that they can have clear, comparable information to make a good decision for themselves.
And one of the things Amy brought up was this question of there are the things that we think, there's the kinds of information that we think students ought to use. Tell me if I'm paraphrasing this correctly. That they ought to use to make choices, and the kinds of things that they do use to make choices, like is there a great football team on Saturday, which is probably not going to be on that piece of paper. Yeah. So is this how big an issue is that? I mean, does it mean that we can't just put the information out there, that we have to teach people how to use it somehow, and how would we go about doing that?
Yeah, I think there are values and involved in deciding what is the information, and that's why it's appropriate that our representatives and government make an informed decision based on expertise and public input. Obviously, this sticker sheet is the reflection of a lot of research and study and debate, and I'm sure will continue to be. But it makes sense that someone's making that decision. My other show and tell is, a reminder of what we all know for why you can't just say disclose without making some decisions about what is going to be disclosed and how. This is if you sign up for iTunes. You have to agree to this plus this, and this then links to this, which is 17 pages, and this isn't even the privacy statement. This is so no one's going to read through this. This is disclosure, but this is not meaningful disclosure. And we've got something like this in higher ed right now, and it doesn't work. It's too burdensome for colleges, and it's not useful for the consumers. And we absolutely can and should make it less burdensome for colleges and more useful to consumers, because this is not a good system.
So Amy, I want to pick up on this issue of regulatory burden. Again, I think, Amy, this was something that you had brought up, or that comes up often in these discussions. I think there's a sense among colleges that the federal government always asks for more, never stops asking for anything. These are tight fiscal times. Regulatory burden doesn't feel like education. But the regulatory scheme that we have now, that is essentially the iPad system, which is sort of an iteration of a system that's been around for, I think, 40 years or so, involves individual colleges filling out surveys, putting their information together and shooting it up through the internet. A lot of the state systems that we're now talking about integrating information from involve some combination of a state process or the automatic generation of administrative data. It's not so much of a survey filling out process. So is there actually a way that taking advantage of these state systems could reduce the administrative burden on colleges, that they wouldn't have to fill out IPEDS forms if their existing state system would be standardized in a certain way?
I think there potentially might be, and I think that's going to be one of the issues that we're exploring. I mean, one of the things, I think maybe the only thing that Pauline and I could agree on is her last point that, you have all of these pages and pages and pages of information, and it's going to be trying to consolidate that and to try and figure out what that right information is and what that, how to present it in a way that people will pay attention. I absolutely think that's going to be a huge key question, and I think the federal government has tried to do that time and time again, and it's a work in progress, and I think it's going to continue to be a work in progress. But I do think, if there is something to be garnered from the states, I think we might be able to look at that, sure. I will say that one of the challenges that we have seen and that we have heard from institutions as we've been having this conversation, even in just preparing for this hearing, is that institutions are being pulled in 50 different directions when it comes to data. So the state data that they're reporting on versus the federal data versus, one federal survey versus another federal survey versus, some of the other work for the accreditors or whatever it is, they're all using different definitions. And so is there a way, so I think one of the questions that we're going to have to explore is there a way to try and streamline some of that so that we're talking about the same thing? The challenge is that everyone has different opinions. It's not as easy as saying for graduation rates. I mean, we've had whole huge discussions over what a graduation rate should be. We attempted to have that conversation in the last reauthorization. We had a whole report over it that the federal government put together, and I believe, it's been a while since I've looked at it, that they couldn't even agree on something. I mean, the whole reason for that report was to try and get some consensus around what should be a good graduation rate for particularly the community colleges. And how do you define that to get something meaningful? Because everyone knows that the first-time, full-time definition that we currently use in IPEDS is not helpful anymore and doesn't show an accurate picture. So it's trying to get the conversation around what that can be and get people to come to the table and actually have those conversations and be willing to kind of put ideas forward that I think is going to craft kind of where we go with some of this.
Tony.
One point about this, and that is one way to get around this is not have higher education do it. You don't want to get this whole thing all tangled up in, frankly, I mean, my first reaction to doing this as IPEDS is, God, no. It's much simpler than that. Wage record data is available in every state in the union. It's been available since 1937, I think it is. Transcript data, now that the Fed and the states have pretty well automated transcript data, all you need are those two streams, those two basic feedstock. And what you've got is a data system that tells you whether whatever course or curriculum somebody was in, whether they were employed, which I think is the first test, not the wage. And then secondly, what's the wage? Because employment itself has value in the American system. We decided that on welfare. It wasn't the wage, it was the employment. So first of all, are they employed? Secondly, what's the wage? The third thing you'd want, which is very hard to get, and maybe you shouldn't try to get it now, is whether they're working in field. You can find out from the wage records and the transcript data what industry they're in, but not necessarily what occupation. And people don't work in industries anymore. They work in occupations. That's where the articulation between education and the labor market is occurred, is between curriculums and occupations, not curriculums and industries. So there's a way to do this without getting hunkered down in the debate about higher education regulation, IPEDS. I can't imagine individual colleges and universities getting wage records from the state employment agencies and then using transcript data and doing this one at a time themselves, frankly.
I think that the technology is such that a lot of the burden is actually can be automated and go away, right? I think that in my hope in the reauthorization of HEA, I'll go back to IPEDS, for example, and then I want to actually pick up on something Tony was talking about. So part of the problem with IPEDS, it's huge, right? and it's just accreted over time. And one of the things that I think that has to happen is that the Congress has to say, oh, in 1972 we passed this legislation, and we asked the Department of Education to collect these data, and nobody cares about them anymore. Right, so it's sort of like, this is part of the problems with every bureaucratic system, right? It just sort of accretes over time, and someone has to go in there and say, did you really want this? Do you care about this anymore? And iPads, NCS can't make a lot of things in iPads go away because it's legislatively determined. So in HEA, one of my hopes is that there's like someone takes the broom into the attic and just sort of says, what is this, right? I have my favorite things that should go away, but I think that we could actually reduce the burden. We could identify things that nobody cares about anymore. So one of the hardest things in running any kind of federal data collection is to say, this is not worth it, right? It's not worth it, because what my joke about this was that every item in every federal survey that NCS ran had a friend, right? And that friend had a friend on the Hill, right? So we try to, the only question, right, quite frankly, I wanted the staffing and school survey to blow up and go away. It's totally worthless, okay? But, we tried. I brought in a group of people and I said, you cannot leave this room without telling me 15 questions to cut. And instead, I got back 30 new questions, right? I said, no, you got to give me 15 to cut. Came back with 45 new questions, right? So this is like one of the things that, we need to go back and clear the attic. It's just, so it's burdensome, but this is because we keep adding burden. And we really have to say, I'm sorry, this would be nice to know, but it's not a compelling national interest. The Department of Education, the federal government, has no compelling interest in knowing, and again, I can give you my favorite list. And also, I think one of the problems is this kind of one-size-fits-all. So iPads, if I have a school with 100 students, I have to fill out iPads the same as I run a state university, right? It's senseless. But it can all be, a lot of it is automated, actually, and part of the reason for the state longitudinal data system was to make it even more automated. Now, so I want to just pick up on Tony's point about schools reporting the data, schools getting these links. That's not the way to go, obviously. The states have the states have the student unit record systems. The states have the wage data. They can merge them. They have merged them. They can, if they want, put them into the public domain. In the states that I'm working with, in Tennessee and Virginia, for example, we're matching only about half of the students who are in the student unit record system are found in the wage data. So the other 50% could have moved out of state. They could be unemployed. They could be in the military. They could be working for churches. They could be on missions. We don't know. But this is one of the fundamental issues that we're going to have to deal with when we start doing these links, which can be done, should be done, right? But the 50% loss rate is probably unacceptable. And finally, I love this, and Paula said right at the beginning, buying a university is not the same as buying a car. Sure, of course that's true. But I buy a lot of complicated things on Amazon, right? And I could compare on a whole bunch of dimensions that I care about. I could put new TVs on. A flat screen TV is like a complicated thing to buy, right? I could take things out. I could put things in. I could have my list. I could add dimensions, subtract dimensions. We need that kind of flexibility. And I'm not sure if the report card, if the scorecard, with one thing about wage data is really the answer. I think we really have to be much more modern and much more flexible about how the data are displayed and how much control students, potential consumers, have over the display of those data.
I will take the moderator privilege to just make one self-endorsement. Amy, you mentioned that during the HEA, there was a big question, how do we measure community college graduation rates? And so they did kick it off to a commission in the proud tradition of government to kick it off to a commission. So anyway, I was on the Commission for Measures of Student Success. We did finish our work We published a report to much acclaim and notice. It's available on the Department of Education website. And I mean, it did actually, I think, there were representatives from community colleges on that commission, and there is, I think, a good, solid set of recommendations that everyone could get behind. And just to the point of wage records, I think it is worth noting that to generate the gainful employment numbers that are now used, the federal government has wage data already from the Social Security Administration. I mean, anyone can go on, again, right now and get a list of thousands of programs and see what the median earnings were of people who graduated from those programs sometime after graduation, because that's a piece of that. So we're kind of we're not in the realm of the hypothetical now. We're just in the realm of, do we want to do what we can do with the data we have? So I'm gonna make this a question to the whole panel, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. Mark, you talked about, you still have the scars, and then also the tattoo, which I guess is on the scars to cover up the scars, or from your efforts in this area, has the public environment changed at all? Are we moving? Are there things that are possible now, either because people think differently or because the data is more easily available, that wasn't the case, say, 5 or 6 years ago? And I'll put that to all four of you.
I think that was a compound question, and I think the answer to each part of the compound is yes.
Okay.
I would just say that yes, as the percentage of students who have to borrow and the amount they're borrowing has gone up, there is increasing consensus among consumers about certain information and certain demand for it. And the administration did put up the college scorecard and the draft shopping sheet and took public comments and used that to help make the decisions about what they included and how they presented. Is it perfect? No. Can it be improved? Yes, but it is a big step forward.
What this is about, at least in technical terms, is that the sheer computing power required to do these things has now become trivial. And our ability to scrape information off the web means that we can scrape whatever we want off college catalogs. It's not a far walk from there to building wage record data using econometric means, and that will happen. I also think that this will happen in individual states. That is, and frankly, all the states that we work with have Republican governors, which is one of the things I notice. So that a governor gets a chance to get their arms around post-secondary education in a way they've never had before. The difficulty, and Mark is right, is that there are, I think our last count was 34, 35 states had literally accomplished the technical feat. But it literally is almost 3 or 4 states actually use the information, and less than that, as I understand it, really build a dashboard so that other people could use it or go all the way with it, which is when you open up the catalog at the college, it has that sheet in front of every major. So, I mean, I think the issue is really, as you say, not whether we have the basic feedstock to understand these things, and whether we give that information that are making to people making very consequential choices about their money and their lives, about what they're going to do after breakfast for the next 45 years of their life. And I think that ultimately the information will out. It's just become too important. The minute education became human capital, this was inevitable.
I mean, I guess I would kind of agree with a lot of what's being said in that I do think this is going to be a huge conversation moving forward. I think it has been a big conversation even since the last reauthorization, which did drag on for quite some time, that became that we weren't, by the time it finished, we were just trying to get it done, and we weren't addressing with the new issues that had cropped up since we started it, 5, 7, 10 years prior. So, hopefully this next one will move in a much more expedient fashion. And, I think we're going to be debating all of these issues kind of in that vein.
Okay, so it is 3 o'clock. We are going to go to questions from the audience. We have people with microphones, so please wait for the microphone to come. Please identify yourself and your affiliation. Let me repeat Andrew Kelly's stern admonishment to make it a question to the panel and not a statement that you would have made had you been on the panel yourself. So, yes, in the back.
Thank you. My name's Sora Wonder. I just graduated or finished a master's program in politics development and democratic education at the University of Cambridge. A lot of the conversation has been about employability or the potential for employment after graduating, but these are rather complex factors. It's not just about the education acquired at the university, but it has a lot to do with family factors, family networks, whether or not the student is seeking work in a city with a good job market or where they have a strong network, personal factors. So graduation rates are one thing, but how accurate or fair is it to attribute employability or potential for employment to a university?
That's a great question.
So I must admit that the data that I'm putting out right now doesn't answer any of your questions, okay? And the reason that in the states that I'm working in, just putting the data out at the program level is such a large step, right? That to just do that is an enormous. I mean, again, why is this a breakthrough? I have no idea. But the fact of the matter is, it really is. And like Tony, a lot of the states that I'm working with have Republican governors, and I think that they're looking at this for a whole variety of perspectives. So there's a lot of warnings in the report that we put out for Tennessee. In a month, we'll put out one for Virginia, Texas, et cetera. I mean, there are a lot of warnings in there. But yes. So we want to be careful when we start comparing. You don't want to compare Harvard to University of Tennessee Martin. I mean, that's clearly the case. But most campuses in the United States are pretty much open admissions, okay, right? So you don't get that kind of stratification. So most of the public institutions are regionals, comprehensives, whatever you want to call, and they're essentially open admissions. And so we want to be really careful about comparing elite not-for-profits, Harvard, Cambridge, whatever, to these comprehensives. But comparing across the comprehensives is a much more reasonable thing to do. The second thing, which is fair, is that especially when you start talking about a lot of regional campuses, and especially if you're talking about community colleges, they're serving a local market. And the conditions in that local market can, in fact, determine a lot about employment and wages and things like that. So I understand that, and ultimately we all need to get into the business of doing risk-adjusted metrics. So you take into account part of the characteristics of the students, and you take into account the characteristics of the metro region that you're servicing, and all of that. But the great is the enemy of the good. Okay, and if I've borrowed $50,000 and 50% or 70% or 80% of the students that I'm tracking in my system are making $25,000 a year, and I'm borrowing $50,000 to make that, or I'm borrowing $80,000 to make that, I cannot go to that woman named Sally and say, oh, by the way, I'm sorry, could I pay you back in rural Tennessee dollars? Right? I got to pay him back in the same dollars as anybody else. So I want to be really careful about the kind of adjustments that we have to make. But I think, your questions are absolutely fair, and I think that ultimately we're going to have to move in that direction. But if the graduates from your program are making $20,000, and there are programs out there, and they're borrowing $50,000 or $75,000, to me that's we have to tell the students that, and maybe we have to do more than tell them. But yes. So anyway, yes. Thank you.
Just one point about that, and that is what is different in the data since 1983 is that what you take does determine what you make. That's the point. That is, just getting a college degree is no longer what it's about. It's about the curriculum, and some curriculums are more powerful than others. So the statistical issue here is resolved. That is, the reliability of this data is very, very high. It tells you that what the last 50 people in the program you went to, how they're doing, whether they're working, and how much money they make. I mean, it doesn't tell you whether there's going to be 50 more hired, although there are ways to play with that, but it tells you what happened to everybody before you. And that's the point, is that the curriculum in the institution, much more the curriculum than the institution, drives the earnings. If you go to Harvard and you become a school teacher, you're not going to make any more than other school teachers. and you're still going to pay whatever it is a year at Harvard. It's more than Georgetown, I'm supposed to say.
I guess the only thing I'd add to that too is I do think that there's a difference in between making sure people understand what they're getting themselves into and having the federal government tell you as a citizen that you can't take that program because we don't think it's a good decision for you. So, I do think that there are some things in HEA that do provide some benchmarks. That those are also, our minimum safety standards and things like that, and those are going to be another part of the conversation. But I think we do have to be careful in terms of taking those types of data and these types of things that we think are important for students to know, and then having the federal government come in and say, well, even though you think you know what you're doing, we don't think you know what you're doing, and so therefore we're going to prevent you from doing that.
Yes, very good panel. I'm Barry Stern with the Haberman Educational Foundation. And I've walked some of the same ground in some of the same states as Mark and Tony. As you all know, I've been doing a study for another state on best practices in linking up education programs with labor market consequences. But my question has to do with this. We have an assumption that human beings are rational actors, and if they have better information, they will make better choices. There's another stream of thought which I think far outweighs the rational thing, is we're essentially irrational beings. People are much more, in fact the data aren't even close from what I've been able to look at, is that even with good information, people are making choices based on an emotional connection to an institution or to a field, and I've had people in my own family doing the very same thing. So if we had some planned variation in some of these states and actually said what actually happens to decision making if you have a state with good information and has the sticker from the automotive, much like the universities have a little sticker for each program they have, is there any difference that those states have? I mean, Mark, and you've looked at some of these. Is better information leading to more rational choices or not?
I think, well, let's see. So I have to hope that the rationality matters. I have to believe that if you provide students and their families with enough information, you're not going to change 100% of the people, clearly, and that can't be our goal. The question is, could you shift enough people? And that's all you really need to do. You just have to shift enough people, because there's a very competitive market out there, right? If you shift enough people, you could absolutely drive systemic change. So the other thing that's actually, Andrew Kelly, I don't know if he's still around, but Andrew and I, there he is. So Andrew and I did a study last year. It's called Filling in the Blanks. It was a randomized controlled trial telephone survey where we had 6 metro areas, and we had random population of parents with kids that were like in their mid-teens thinking about college. In the control group, we gave them 5 pieces of information about the schools. In the treatment group, we gave them the same 5 pieces of pairs of schools, and we gave them the graduation rate because we picked the schools with as much as 10 points difference in graduation rates. We got 15%, up to 15 percentage points shift in the preferences of parents to the high graduation rate school. So the only new piece of information that was presented, and admittedly it was presented in a very systematic way. It was actually much better looking than this, which I find really ugly. And whoever designed this looks like they got stuck in the 50s. But the fact of the matter is that we actually documented substantial changes in the preferences of parents by showing them one piece of information, graduation rates. So we really, and again, we're not going to change 100% of the people. And I don't believe we have to change 100% of the people.
To be even more pessimistic about this than you are, Barry. Yes, you're right. I mean, the last two of the last 4 prizes in economics, the Nobel or whatever one it is that economists get, I don't know. Never been that close, so I know which one it is. But are about that, irrationality and decision making. But on the other hand, we see broad rationality, that is, people want to make a lot of money, go to major in business. When people have an intention, they act on that intention. Oftentimes the intention is uninformed, and that's a problem. I think there's a general problem that the core intention, especially among less advantaged kids in America, is to get a college degree. And what tends to happen is they take the path of least resistance to do that. The kid that starts out in engineering and ends up in, I don't want to make things up, it's communication. So I think in the end, they ought to know what happened when they made that shift in terms of their earnings potential, employment potential, and I think that'll improve the quality of their decision making. The other thing is, I don't think ultimately, yes, we're talking about transparency, but underneath all this, there's a regulatory issue. It comes up in the gainful employment debate. There are times when the federal government and institutions put money on the stump, give students loans, give them Pell Grants, and say, come on in. And then when they do, and they can't get a job or complete the program or pay back their loans, they default. It's one and done. They'll never get another loan. And in a lot of ways, we're all a little implicit there. The government and the institutions have a responsibility to tell the students the truth about what they're doing, I think. Otherwise, it's kind of a species of entrapment. We give the institutions 3 chances to fix it. The students get 1 in gainful employment. So I think, there is an issue here, and especially going forward. We're short a couple $300 billion in post-secondary education, looking down the line, and if we want everybody to graduate and all the rest of it. If that's the case, we're going to be number 1 in the world again. It's about $200 billion. We don't have the money. So either we're going to find the money in Medicare and Social Security and places like that, and I doubt it, or what's going to happen is funding is going to decline, which it's doing and will continue to do. In that case, what we're making is a distributional decision about who gets to go to college. And at some juncture, it becomes important for people to know, one, what the best pathway is for them through college and into a career, and two, the only other way to deal with efficiency is simply by reducing access, and that's going on all over the country. What institutions are doing that have to meet new completion requirements and other kinds of requirements is they're chasing better students, which means students who can pay full price, go full time, and have a much higher chance of completing on time. That cuts out the less advantaged kids. I think the whole system has a fundamental efficiency problem that in the end becomes a problem about equity. And unless we can find ways to make the system more efficient, we can't possibly meet all the demand for post-secondary education. That's the hard fact, I think, that drives this over time.
And I want to be clear, did you diss communications majors? Because there's a lot of journalists here in the room. And, okay, next question. Over here. Art.
I want to pick up on Tony's point. If you're right, and I assume you are, that it's more important that the field you study in than the school that you study it in, then why aren't we spending more time developing data for students on the probability of getting a job in different fields as the primary data source that needs more information, and then the schools will advertise what fields they have programs in, and people can make a judgment about how good those programs are in those fields. But I think the problem right now is that we have people saying, on average, it's good to go to college. And yeah, it's on average it is good, but it's not good in each specific way. And so is there anything being done about looking at the payoff in different fields of study, regardless of where you go?
Sure, but that's labor economics, and labor economics and education are 2 separate planets. And there's very little that combines the two. It's one of the reasons my little institution gets foundation money. There's not much of us around. Mark is all of us who do this, you can get in a very small room, which is remarkable given the investment over $400 billion, and it's important to labor market success in the United States. We've never really built a Department of Human Resources, which was proposed several times on the Hill in my day, where we combined the education and the labor department. Now that is anathema to educators. I understand why. But essentially what we're talking about is that department, is how you connect labor market perspectives with education perspectives without doing violence to the higher purposes of post-secondary education. And I think the way you do that is not by reorganizing the government, The way you do that is with information systems that join the two.
Just a factoid. So if you look at the Tennessee report that we put out a couple of days ago, you'll see that actually if you look at the average salaries at the institution level across the public institutions in Tennessee, and this is exactly your point, there's very little variation in the overall averages. But when you start drilling down to the program level, you find $10,000 and $15,000 differences between the highest and the lowest performing programs across institutions. This is 1 year. This is 1 year after 1 year after graduation. It's 1 year after graduation.
Okay. All the way in the back.
My name is Caleb Overgaard, and I have kind of a question about why we're doing all this. I see a distinction between access to raw data from a consumer perspective and access to coordinated information, in the words of the good senator. And my question is, are we shifting the research responsibility from the consumers to the federal government because we believe that the consumers cannot easily enough create the coordinated information from the raw data? And if it's the latter, what is a standard of easy enough? When is it too difficult for consumers to compile data, and therefore the responsibility of the federal government to do the research for us?
I believe that the federal government collects lots of data, and I believe that for lots of reasons they can't do a very good job in terms of making it public. Okay, and I think a lot of this, we could go, again, this has to do with the politics, this has to do with just resource constraints, but I believe, look, I go to so many meetings where everybody talks about big data, and it's usually cool, right? Cool big data, right? Well, I mean, we actually have incredible amounts of information out there. I myself don't believe that the federal government is actually going to be able to take all of that and put it into usable ways for most consumers. But to the extent to which that data are available, right, and given privacy concerns, again, given privacy concerns, legitimate privacy concerns, I believe that what's going to happen is that you're going to have 10, 15 providers out there. We already see them, trying to figure out how to repackage those data, and there'll be all kinds of models out there to help students identify, the best payoff. So I mean, it's like Princeton Review tells you what's the hottest party school. But there will be places out there that'll tell you, this is, if you want to have a middle class wage and get a job, this is where you go and this is what you major in. And I believe that there are companies out there that are already doing this, and that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to see.
Jamal.
Is this on? Yeah. Jamal Abdul-Alim, correspondent with diverse issues in higher education. My question is, in trying to tie wages to transcript data on a large-scale level, would it be sufficient to rely upon sample sizes, or are we talking about doing this with every single student and wage data? Because I'm thinking maybe a sample size might be a more practical, feasible way to do this. It's done with NAEP scores. Maybe it could be done with this. The other thing is, I'm wondering, how do you account for mobility? That is, people that move from one state to another. It was mentioned, but I don't think that was given adequate attention. I mean, we live in a society where people are, highly mobile. They might be educated in one state but work somewhere else. So how do you really account for that?
Okay. So, being Amy called herself a geek. So, but I'll give you my answer. Surveys, done, finished, end. Okay. We don't need surveys. We have administrative data. We have everybody. Why would we even think about doing a sample? So I got to be careful here, because I once said something during one of these meetings, and like even the people at AI smacked me upside my head for being too rude. I have a tendency for that anyway. But anyway, I mean, in all seriousness, samples. Forget about it. We're so far beyond samples, right? We have administrative data. It's all about capturing those administrative data and trying to figure out how to merge them, how to milk them, how to use them. So, don't talk to me about samples, and don't talk to me about NAEP. Great invention in the 1970s, but, time to move on. Okay, so your second point was mobility. That for me is really where the national versus the state balance comes into play. Okay, so I told you I pick up 50% of the students in Tennessee student unit records. I pick up 50% of them in the linked student unit record UI data match. Okay, I cannot tell you, right? I cannot tell you just on Tennessee data, and I can't tell you in Virginia data or Arkansas or Texas or whatever else. I can't tell you in this window, right, about what happened to students who left the state. Now, there are ways in which we can address that. People think of this thing called the wage record interchange system 2, not as compared to RIS 1. RIS 2 exists, and theoretically you will be able to capture the kind of data of students that move across state lines. I think there are all kinds of problems in that system. Maybe we'll crack that, but the transfer issue and the mobility issue is serious. Kevin actually was right, and he said that the Department of Education was able, after a considerable amount of negotiations, to get wage data from the Social Security Administration. But that was a lot of work and very difficult. So there may be other ways of doing the kind of national match that we need. We don't have the legal framework. We don't have, it's just a nightmare now. And I think we will get better at tracking movement across states, because that really matters. But I will just add one more caveat to that. If I was a state governor, right? Okay, and I'm paying for a system of education, a state system of education, where 80% of my graduates are leaving the state, I might be a little upset about that. We are investing in higher education for human capital development, knowing, there are a lot of small states that really care about this, right? That if a program is educating students and 80% of them or 90% of them are staying in the state and contributing to the wealth and development of that state, that, from a state perspective, is really good compared to educating a bunch of kids who go to New York City.
Michael Tanner, Association of Public and Land Grant Universities. I wasn't around for the unit record debate. I think it would be valuable in understanding students who are performing and institutions that are performing if we could actually track highly mobile students. So I just will say that. Why, if it's a privacy concern, do we not object to the state of California gathering data, but we do object to the federal government gathering data? Why do we think it's okay to have 50 potentially incompatible systems across the nation that would make it hard for you to get consistent understandings, but it's not okay for the federal government? So
I think it's because it's the states versus the federal government. The states are sovereign in their own right, and the states have the ability to set up certain things that they feel that they need to do to better their citizens and all of that. And so it's a basic federal versus state powers issue, that we as the federal government don't have a problem with the states doing what they feel they need to do to account for their grants or their public higher ed systems or their K-12 systems or any of that, versus we as the federal government creating one big giant database with all of the states across all of the country, in short.
All right. Yes, there in the back. Yeah.
Hi, Jarrett Cummings with EDUCAUSE. To that point, I think there are two key questions. One, as the federal funding for state longitudinal data system development has passed, and you talked about earlier the large number of states who may have systems but aren't using them, what are your concerns about state maintenance of funding for those systems, especially as we continue to talk about them as the potential foundation for addressing these data needs. And then secondly, in terms of the issue of mobility, much of the conversation's been around linking student identifiers across state longitudinal data systems to allow for mobility tracking. How do we avoid the privacy considerations of that in relation to what we're concerned about at the national level?
So the first one is that once these data are linked, to put something on top of them is actually remarkably cheap. Okay, so I mean so right now the Lumina Foundation is paying for the work that I'm doing in the States, but the fact of the matter is that we could go in and help a state do this for given how much money is spent on higher education, it's trivial, totally trivial amounts of money. I'm not sure about the second question. I'm not sure I followed that one. Could you repeat that one?
Sure. It's basically much of the conversation around using state longitudinal data systems to address mobility issues has concerned linking student identifiers across state longitudinal data systems.
You mean the K-12 versus higher ed, or are you talking about in Massachusetts linking
the whole boat? The whole boat. Basically allowing the state longitudinal data system in Massachusetts to link with the state longitudinal data system in California and everywhere in between,
right,
to allow you to track individuals across states as they pass through the workforce.
Right.
And how does that avoid the concerns about privacy that we ran into with big iPads?
So I mean, look. So I'm totally on board with Amy's comment on this. I think that if states are involved, so if states are involved in interstate compacts and interstate agreements, which they all have, and they're doing this all the time, I think that's one thing. Okay, and I think that ultimately there'll be agreements like Complete College America, right? I mean, they're developing other metrics. States are voluntarily signing up for that, and it ultimately become a national standard. So I think that we have to just be very careful and very mindful of the federal system that we have. When I was one of the iPads people, hell with the states. We got to do this, right? Well, the fact of the matter is that the states are powerful, and they're sovereign entities, and it may be inefficient, and it may be cumbersome, and maybe you wish you could shove things down their throat, but you can't. So I think we have to encourage the states, we have to support the states, we have to work with the states, and we'll get. I mean, it may be longer, more inefficient, but in fact, for me, it's the beauty of the American system.
Well, and
no, I'm sorry. OMB doesn't like the beauty of the American system. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, Rachel.
I think this one could be one of those things that, it's better if the federal government stays out rather than get involved, because we have seen time and time again where the federal government has gotten involved in things that are happening already within, whether it be the private sector, the states, or whatever, it just screws them up. So I think we need to keep that in mind as well.
I think we have time for one more question down in front.
Hi, Ravi Suave, Daily Caller News Foundation. So one reason I think you could be skeptical that greater centralization of this information would help is that presumably college advisors know all these things already, or mostly, and they're complicit, I would say, in this deception. They're not telling students, don't go to this program, don't go to this major. So maybe you say they don't have a clue.
They don't have a clue.
And
okay.
The average public high school, I think, has a ratio. I think the average public high school has a ratio of hundreds of students to every guidance counselor. So there's also that issue as well.
Perhaps the advisors actually at the colleges, I meant, advising on what major, if you get this major, you're so and such likely to get a job here would be your income.
They don't have a clue.
They never advise you not to do it anyway. So.
They don't have a clue.
Okay.
They don't, if you look up the major professional associations, advising associations, whether it's K-12 or college, they don't even have employment-related interest groups in the professional societies. They don't have a clue. This whole world is alien to them. The high school advisors are about enforcing social regulations, drugs, all sorts of other things, and getting people to college And then there's a private industry that does that as well, that's advising. College, it's all word of mouth. I mean, none of them, most, or a large number of urban community colleges now buy job openings data, which is problematic in and of itself. But no, this is not, one of the reasons everybody talks about let's build a dashboard that interacts directly with students and parents and regulators and legislators and everybody else is the ideal case is you'd put some advising behind it. When you figure the cost of that, it's absolutely prohibitive because it's not there now. That is, adding that element into higher ed and student services, it would be a substantial federal program or a state program to do that. But as of now, there is no apparatus out there.
Go fire the advisors, right?
They do what they do. All right, it's 3:29. On behalf of the American Enterprise Institute and the New America Foundation, please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause. And thanks to all of you for coming today. It's been great.